What if the human brain is sensitive to the atomic states of the atoms within it? If you could manipulate these states using quantum entanglement outside of a laboratory setting, with only, say, light or electromagnets, this would theoretically allow you to influence the brain by shining light through a sample of certain molecules, and allowing quantum information to be encoded in photons as they pass through. This sounds like magic, but so did all of modern science at some point. According to a 2006 study by two scientists at the Biophysics Consulting Group, the experimental data to demonstrate this happens has already been produced. Measuring non-locality through quantum effects is done in all kinds of settings. In classrooms and online, it's common to see levitation or exotic behaviors in superfluids owing to quantum effects. When it comes to analyzing how discrete particles behave in conditions of entanglement, most studies focus on single photons or atoms and require highly sophisticated detection equipment. In contrast to these experiments, we know quantum information is carried at macroscopic scales on the electromagnetic medium like light, microwaves, etc. The foundation of this theory is known as the quantum theory of light, which states light is an ideal carrier of quantum information since photons travel long distances with minimal loss and can be entangled fairly easily. Fair enough, but how does quanta actually end up on a photon? Remember that photons are emitted when an electron drops from one atomic orbital shell to a lower one. The difference in energy between these two electron orbitals determines the energy of the emitted photon. A photon contains the quanta of the atom that emitted it, which tells us information about the atom at the moment the photon was released. Other quanta, like the photon's polarization, are determined by the atom's electromagnetic field at the time of emission. Those familiar with quantum theory will know the very existence of the quasi-particle photon, as we know it today, owes to our observations of its quanta, the energy it carries that can be expended as kinetic energy when it collides with particles and causes electrons to eject, the photoelectric effect. The polarity of photons is a much easier property to observe than the electron spin states of atoms, so photons continue to be the foundation of experimental study in quantum physics for over 100 years now. Emitted light can be used to store quantum information from atoms, and in terms of computing, this is a write function. The next step to developing quantum communication is to add a read function, allowing a conversion of quanta on the photon back into matter that can be interpreted. This is an area of great interest, and many experimental studies have accomplished reading and writing to and from entangled photons. In a 2004 paper published in Science, Quantum State Transfer Between Matter and Light, single rubidium atoms are used to release photons containing state information, or quantum memory. The photons then interact with other rubidium atoms, and the changes in those receiver atoms allows reading of the quantum memory. How we actually get photons entangled varies, with three approaches being popular today. By shining a laser through a nonlinear crystal, a crystal that alters the light passing through it, we can split a photon into two entangled low-energy photons. Entangled properties of this process are momentum, frequency, and polarization. By shining a laser on a quantum dot, a nanoscale carbon structure, electrons in the dot will trigger the release of entangled photons. Entangled properties in this process are time and polarization. During an atomic cascade event, when an atom loses a proton or neutron and gains recoil energy, it releases entangled photons. Polarization and angular momentum are conserved in this process. Compared to entangling particles, the approach to photons is much simpler, and we generate entangled photons all the time in nuclear reactions and certain laser devices. To be clear, we don't have to isolate, influence, and then separate entangled photons to demonstrate that non-locality occurs when using light as a medium. We just do this because it addresses our theories about entanglement with the fewest variables possible. It's good science. In light of these relatively simple approaches, the idea that photons colliding with certain molecules might cause entanglement and communication of quanta should not be dismissed. There are certain to be plenty of other techniques out there that we're not aware of yet. especially considering lasers, quantum dots, and fission reactions that produce these entangled photons are all very new discoveries. Using light to transmit quanta seems simple enough, but what applications does this actually have beyond the lab? To investigate this phenomenon, we'll use a hypothesis called spin-mediated consciousness theory, which says, the fundamental property called quantum spin that all particles have plays a role in the emergence of consciousness. It's a simple idea, if not controversial. The theory has a few specific terms it uses, calling each bit of spin data, represented by an atom, a mind pixel. These mind pixels entangle across a larger neural structure, and their collapse leads to the experience of consciousness in the theory. Today we'll focus mostly on one experimental paper, photon-induced non-local effects of general anesthetics on the brain. I'll read from the abstract to frame our discussion. Here we report that applying magnetic pulses to the brain when a general anesthetic sample was placed in between caused the brain to feel the effect of said anesthetic for several hours after the treatment, as if the test subject had actually inhaled the same. This is as simple as it sounds. The experiment, conducted on 4 participants in a variety of situations, involved projecting an electromagnetic pulse through a vial containing an anesthetic, with the pulse then passing through a human being. Anesthetics like morphine were chosen due to their dramatic influence on brain function when inhaled. The said effect is consistently reproducible on all 4 subjects tested. We further found that drinking water exposed to magnetic pulses, laser light, microwave, or even flashlight beams, when an anesthetic sample was placed in between, also causes consistently reproducible brain effects in various degrees. The claim here is that water can store the information carried by entangled photons for a period of time, allowing water to be irradiated and then consumed later to produce the anesthetic effects. The study notes other transmission medium did not produce the same results. For example, a magnetic coil was used to receive the entangled pulse, and then was re-emitted closer to the subject after being carried through a wire. The wire conduction method appeared to produce no transmission of quantum memory, and no effect on the subject. The paper involves 3 distinct situations. First, the aforementioned setup, where magnetic pulses, microwaves, lasers, and unfocused light are filtered through an anesthetic, and then absorbed by a subject. This resulted in reports of perceived changes in the brain correlating with the anesthetic used. As a control, pure water and an empty vessel were used. The magnetic signal came from a 20-watt coil playing a signal between 5 Hz and 10 kHz. Subjects were of course unaware of the nature of the experiment or the contents of the vessel, if any. Second, samples of water took the place of the human subject and were subjected to the mentioned types of radiation. The water was then consumed by the subject, again creating perceived effects that correlated to the exposed medium. Third, each dose of plain water was split into 2 samples before the experiment started. One sample was consumed, and the other was irradiated in a different location. In this example, too, the subject experienced the symptoms of the anesthetic. All 3 tests were conducted blind, meaning the subjects were not aware of the nature of the experiment, the conditions the water was exposed to, or the use of anesthetics. Obviously, the largest problem with this study is its small sample size. Some of this problem is resolved by them iterating with 3 different situations, each providing a different perspective on the same phenomenon. It's worth noting this study would never prove the hypothesis of spin-mediated consciousness due to its small sample size and broad focus, but it does progress the idea from theory to experiment, and should not be dismissed on the basis of its limitations. In 2025, we have no real idea how quantum spin affects change in the brain, something the authors concede. We point out from the outset that although it is commonly believed that quantum entanglement cannot be used to transmit classical information, the function of the brain may not be totally based on classical information. An interesting point. In spite of our continuing inability to understand the brain's mechanisms, experimental results in the paper demonstrate obvious applications. If the findings are held true, this means water has unique entanglement properties and interacts with quantum information directly. Interest has been growing around the phenomenon of biophotons, the low-energy photons emitted by biological processes in humans, plants, and animals. If the theory of spin-mediated consciousness is even partially correct, these two concepts pair to provide a framework for quantum-mediated interactions between living beings. I hope you found this study as interesting as I did. It will tie into a lot of the subjects that we'll cover in the future, as well as some that we've already covered. Thank you again for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and there will be more content coming right around the corner. Have a good night.